Welcome to the all-new PhotographyBB Artistry2 Portrait Art Actions for Photoshop. I'm Dave Seram, the Editor-in-Chief of PhotographyBB, and today I'm going to demonstrate some of our newly updated actions in our Artistry2 collection. I believe there are so many photographers like myself who want to push the boundaries of photography into the art world and create something more with their photographs. Digital art can transform our photographs into something that produces a completely different emotional response and allows us to communicate our feelings and express ourselves in new ways. So we wanted to push ourselves to develop new versions of our popular actions for portraits. What we came up with is Artistry2 Portrait Art Actions for Photoshop, which includes some of the most popular artistic effects specifically intended to be used on photographs of people. These actions are going to transform photographs of your kids playing, sporting events, selfies, newborns, weddings, costume-themed shoots, city portraitures, and client work into beautiful works of digital art that you can share online or even print to full-size canvases for your home. On behalf of myself and everyone here at PhotographyBB, thank you for checking out our brand new Artistry2 Portrait Art Actions for Photoshop. We hope you have hours of fun creating stunning works of art with these, and I personally look forward to seeing everything you create using these actions. So before we begin, a brief word on compatibility. Due to the way that Photoshop works, these actions are not compatible with every version of Photoshop. We've created these to work on Photoshop CC 2015 and newer to make use of the most current features that Adobe has included in these more recent versions of Photoshop. Additionally, because of the way that actions work, these are only compatible with English language versions of Photoshop. Our PhotographyBB artistry actions are designed to work with a variety of image resolutions and sizes. However, due to the way that Photoshop filters work, the results will look different when running any Photoshop action on high-res images versus low-res images. We have designed the PhotographyBB artistry actions to work with high-res images, either RAW files or JPEG files, shot with a DSLR camera. The ideal image size for optimal results is anywhere from 3000 to 5000 pixels on the long edge of your image. As always, something we are very proud of, our actions are entirely non-destructive to your image files. Every one of our actions begins by creating a duplicate file, leaving your original image files completely untouched. So let's talk about installing actions into Photoshop. Once you've downloaded your PhotographyBB actions, your first step is to install them. Installing actions into Photoshop is relatively easy, but before you do so, I always like to make one suggestion. I like to keep all of my Photoshop actions in one place, separate from the default download folder that your system probably receives them in when you download them for the first time. For myself, I like to create one main folder on my hard drive, in this case the Pictures folder on my Mac. Now inside the main Pictures folder, I like to create a few different subfolders. One for Lightroom presets, one for Photos, which contains every single photograph that I have on my computer, one for Photoshop Actions, and one more for Photoshop Brushes. Now I do this to keep everything in one place. It makes things much easier if I ever need to reinstall Photoshop one day, or even when I upgrade to a new hard drive or a new computer. This way I can just copy over my entire Pictures folder over to the new computer, or just the Photoshop actions, brushes, or presets by themselves. So this is just my personal preference, but I've found it to be a huge time saver over the years, so I would highly recommend this organization structure for you too. Now once you've downloaded the actions to your computer, you can now install them into Photoshop. So to do this, open Photoshop and go to the menu, Window, Actions. When the Actions panel appears, click on the little drop-down arrow menu and go down to Load Actions. Then navigate to the action you would like to install and click Open. Your action will now be ready to use inside the Photoshop Actions panel. Additionally, some of our actions include a custom brush pack, which also needs to be installed into Photoshop in order for these actions to work. If you've purchased an individual action that requires one of our custom brush packs, the corresponding brushes will be included in your download. If you purchase one of our action collections, such as our Artistry2 collection, you will receive a single custom brush file that includes everything you need for the entire collection. Now, installing brushes into Photoshop is extremely easy, so let's look at how to do that now. In Photoshop, go to the menu Edit, Presets, Preset Manager. Make sure the preset type is set to brushes from the drop-down menu. Then click on Load, and navigate to where you downloaded or saved your new brush pack. Select the brush file, which ends in .abr, and click Open. Then click Done to close the preset manager, and that's it. The brushes are ready to use. Now, the last thing you should always check before running any action that requires a custom brush is that your brush opacity is set to 100%. So click on the letter B on the keyboard to activate the brush tool. Then at the top of your window, set the brush opacity to 100% if it isn't already. You can also click on the 0 key to quickly change the brush opacity to 100% as a shortcut. Your actions and brushes are all installed and you're ready to have some fun. Mystical Portrait is an action that I actually started working on over 5 years ago when my daughter was born. For those of you who photograph babies and small children, you know very well that it's often quite difficult to capture the perfect shot since these little ones are always on the move. There were many times that I would chase my daughter around to get that perfect shot of her, but that meant having to constantly change my vantage point. So I would wind up with cool shots of her in action, but less than ideal backgrounds with too many distractions for my liking. So I set out to create an action that would allow me to turn my photos into something more artistic, where the background would fade away and allow my images to be a more magical representation of my lovely subject. So here's a shot of her that I liked, but she was running around, and while the background isn't terribly distracting here in this case, I thought there was an opportunity to give this one more of an artistic flair and sort of a dreamy type of look to it. So the first step is to select the action, Mystical Portraits, from the Actions panel. When you open the toggle, you'll see there are 2 steps to the action. Click on Step 1, select Focus, and click Play at the bottom of the Actions panel. The pop-up dialog now tells us to paint over the areas of our image that we want to preserve, which is our main subject. So let's click Stop to do this now. So there are a number of ways to accomplish this step. You can use the brush, which is automatically selected for you by default, and simply paint over the subject, making sure to be as accurate as possible. You'll notice that you're painting on the main focus area layer, which allows you to use the eraser tool to erase your brushing if you make any mistakes. Now, alternatively, I like to select my subject using the Quick Selection tool instead. So to use this method, you need to first click on the background layer where we're going to make a selection of our main subject. Now, we do the selection on the background layer because that's currently the only layer with actual pixels on it. So click on the background layer to make it active if you're going to use this method. Then you choose the Quick Selection tool by pressing W or Shift W if that doesn't select your Quick Selection tool right away. And then just paint over the area that you want to select. You can increase or decrease the size of this tool using the square bracket keys. Now you can release the mouse button and press it again to continue adding to your selection. Or if you select something outside of the main subject area, you can hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and paint to subtract areas from your selection. So let's finish up selecting my main subject here using this method. And actually, I'm going to leave out part of the subject to show you how to fix that if you missed a spot by mistake. So now with the selection made, we're going to click on the main focus area to make that active and fill it with the paint color that we would have been brushing with if we were using the brush tool method instead. So to do this quickly, press Shift Delete and change the drop down to foreground color and click Enter or OK. Now in this example, you can see that I missed part of the subject here, so that's easy to fix. So we're just going to click back on the background layer again and continue making the selection of the missed areas, and then go back to the main focus area layer and press Shift-Delete again and click Enter or OK to fill in those remaining areas. Now you can get as accurate as you want to with selections like the hair in this case, but for this example I'll leave that out, which will still produce a wonderful final result. Now again, you could have done this just by using the brush tool that's automatically selected for you after running the step 1 of the action, but I find that the quick selection tool does a faster and more accurate job in most cases. Okay, so with our main focus area painted, we can now click on step 2, Run Mystical, and click play. Now, depending on the speed and configuration of your computer, the action may take a few minutes to complete. Okay, the action is complete here, and this dialog tells us that we can make custom adjustments if we would like to. So close this dialog box, and let's have a look at what more we can do. And let's also close the Actions panel out of the way as well. Okay, so firstly, I'm pretty happy with the result here. I've got a really cool, dreamy, mystical feeling, which is completely different from the original image with the background of the trees. But there's a lot more I can do here. So I think for this one, I'd like to use the crop tool and just tighten the crop on my lovely subject here, like this. Okay, so in the Layers palette now, you'll see a number of layer groups here that we can explore and experiment with for different effects. So we'll start at the top here with tonal adjustments. So you can click on the little toggle to open this group up, and you can play with the 4 layers here for different effects. If you'd like to darken the image or brighten it, you can click on the visibility toggle to turn those layers on or off. You can also double click on the adjustment icon of either of these layers to make refinements to these options too. So actually, I like how the brighten image looks, so I'll turn that layer visibility on, but I'm also going to dial it down a little by reducing the opacity of the layer to around 50%. Now you can also add vibrance by turning that layer on, and I actually like that, or I can double click it to adjust it further. So maybe I'll leave the vibrance at 20, but I'm going to reduce the saturation down to +5. Okay, now I can also see what the Add Contrast layer does, which is turned on by default. So yeah, the contrast is pretty cool, so I'll leave that on, and again, I can double click it to make deeper adjustments if necessary. So I'll close up this layer group toggle to keep things tidy, and let's look at the color options group now. So here we have a lot of choices for different color toning of the entire image. The first layer allows you to introduce a color cast over the entire image. So you can turn the layer visibility on, and then double click on the color swatch to change the color. So this is going to have a pretty strong effect on the image, and again, you can leave it like that, or you can change the opacity to reduce the effect. So alternatively, you can use any of the black and white or the 10 color options that we've created for you just by turning on or off the layer visibilities of those layers. So you can see there are a number of different color effects that you can introduce very quickly. So let's close up that group, and let's look at the next group, Subject Effects. Now this group actually only contains 2 layers, the first being a subtle glitter type of effect that goes around the edges of the main subject, which you can turn on and off like this. And if it's too subtle, you can click B to activate the brush tool, then click on the layer mask to make it active, and click D to make sure white is the foreground swatch color, and then simply paint on the mask where you would like more sparkles to appear. It's magical. Now the next layer is this misty area below the subject, which helps to blend them into this newly mystical world that we've created here. So you can turn that on or off, or adjust the opacity to your liking. Now our next layer group contains all of the rim lighting effects on our subject. So we have a few different layers inside here, and you can play around with the visibilities and opacities if you would like to change the effect of the rim lighting. So if I turn the visibility of the whole group on and off, you can see the overall effect of the rim lighting layers, and you can even adjust the opacity of the group as a whole if necessary. So next up is our main subject. So we can open this group up, and there are some options in here to play with as well. Now I'm going to zoom in to 100% so you can better see the effects of these layers. So we've introduced a details layer which sharpens the subject, and you can adjust the level of sharpening in two ways. So the first is to increase or reduce the effect by changing the layer opacity. And here you can really see the effect that this has as I adjust the opacity. Now the other way to adjust the sharpness is by double-clicking on the high pass filter. Now if you don't see it in the layers palette, check to make sure the layer effects toggle is open by clicking on it here at the far right side of the layer. So now we can double-click on high pass and make adjustments to the radius to increase or decrease the sharpening. So generally, you want to aim for as thin a radius as possible, which you can still see in the preview area here. Now, if you go too wide on the radius, you're going to introduce unwanted halos in the image. So as a rule of thumb, aim for the lowest radius where you can still see fine details in the preview area. And I can actually take this down to about one pixel here and click OK. Now remember, this isn't a necessary step. You don't have to do this with every image. These layer groups are here just to give you the flexibility to optionally refine your image if you like to play around with these things. So next is smoothness. Now this layer will generally affect the skin smoothness of your subject. And again, you can play with the visibility, opacity, or double click on the surface blur filter to go in deeper and change the amount of smoothness processing. Now in most cases, the default settings are going to be just great. So the next layer here adds a bit of an illustrative or HDR type of effect to help blend the subject more smoothly into this mystical world. So again here, you can adjust the visibility, opacity, or the Gaussian blur filter to change how the illustration effect appears. So for this step, I'd recommend zooming out to view your entire image before making changes to the illustrative look. So when you double click on the Gaussian blur filter, you'll notice that increasing the radius adds more contrast, and reducing it has the effect of flattening contrast in your subject. So again, we've set the default to do a great job with most images. Now the last layer in this set is simply the main subject as photographed. So if you would like to remove the details layer, smoothness, and the illustration effect, you can turn those layers all off and just have your main subject without any of the processing. So let's close up this group and let's have some fun with the bokeh effects group. Okay, so as you can see, we have 3 levels of bokeh effects. Large is the default setting, but we can also turn on medium and small to really make this portrait even more magical. So again, these layers can be controlled by their visibility and opacity. And if you want to add more bokeh to the different areas, you can again paint with a white brush on the layer masks of any of these areas to reveal even more bokeh. So in fact, let's add some more of the medium bokeh into this area up here. So I click on B to bring up the brush tool and click on the layer mask on the bokeh medium layer and make sure my foreground color swatch is set to white, which it is. And I can start painting to reveal more bokeh anywhere I would like. Now once I'm finished, I can adjust the opacities to my liking, like this. Cool, okay. So we can close up this group, and now let's explore the background layers group. So first, we have the mist that appears behind our main subject, and we can adjust that opacity as we like. We have a glow layer that controls the amount of background glow around the main subject. And again, similar control with a visibility or opacity. We have a color splash layer, which is going to appear differently on every photograph, and it just introduces some color interest into the background. So you can see how turning the visibility on or off gives you more of a flat background when you turn it off, whereas turning it back on gives you a hint of some color. So next we have some mystical darkness, which you can again control with the visibility or opacity. And the same for the mystical fog layer. And here we have a background gradient layer, and this one is really cool. So you can add a gradient that will affect just the background, not the main subject. So this is different than the color options group at the top, which affect the whole image, both the subject and the background. So here we can change up the tones of just the background without affecting the subject. So I think a nice blue and yellow combination will really suit this particular image. So let's apply that. So you can turn on the visibility of the layer and then double click the gradient swatch. And when the dialog box appears, you can click the actual gradient strip to change the colors. And then to adjust each color, you just click on the little tiny color pointer here and then adjust its color accordingly. So I'll adjust mine to blue and yellow. Okay. And then click OK. Then I can still make further adjustments. I can keep this as a linear gradient, or I can change to any of the other gradient fill options. So radial might look cool. And I might have to reverse the colors by clicking on the reverse checkbox and turning that on. And I can even scale that up a bit to maybe 150%. So that's a different effect. But actually, I like the linear gradient, so I'll turn off the reverse checkbox, and I can adjust the angle to best suit my image. And I kind of like that. So I can reduce that just a bit by adjusting the opacity of this layer, maybe down to 20%. So you can see it's quite subtle, but it adds an interesting tone to the background without affecting the subject here. Now the next two layers work together, and what we can do is reduce the opacity of the background texture to reveal a color tone just on the background. So this typically works really, really well when you pick a nice bright color on the background color layer. So I'll reduce the opacity of the background texture layer down to 80%, like this. And now I'll double click on the color swatch of this background color layer. And now the blue actually is a really nice color contrast against our main subject, but for this image I'm feeling that something with less contrast and more of a bright warm feeling. So like this. Yeah, I like that. So I'll click OK. And I think I'm actually going to reduce the opacity of the bokeh group a bit. And that actually completes our adjustment options. So if I hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and click on the background layer visibility icon, you can see the entire effect going from the original image to our brand new mystical portrait art conversion. It's a totally different look and feel, and I really like the effect that it has on this image. So now this is going to work great on such a wide variety of photographs, allowing you to create anything from a dark and ominous mystical portrait to a light and airy one, depending on your subject. So try using it to create a mystical avatar of yourself for social media even. Now I hope you find hours of fun with this one, and thank you very much for checking out our PhotographyBB mystical portrait action. Enjoy! Welcome to our brand new PhotographyBB Urban Art 2 action for Photoshop. And wow, what a journey here. Now, we originally created our first version of the Urban Art action way back in 2008 to help our users recreate the urban illustration effect of a Photoshop plugin called LucasArt. Now, unfortunately, the company that produced the plugin has since gone out of business, possibly because at the time the LucasArt plugin was so expensive and out of reach for many consumers at that time. Now, that aside, it did produce a beautiful HDR type of grungy illustration, which was really new and a highly sought after stylized look at that time. So we set out to reproduce the effect as best as possible using only Photoshop filters, and in 2008 our Urban Art action was born. Now over the years I've been playing with different adjustments to that effect, wanting to create something that would be a blend of our original Urban Art effect with additional painterly and high energy elements. The result is something we are really proud of here, and this is our newly recrafted Urban Art 2 action for Photoshop. Now, before you run Urban Art 2, the action does make use of some of our new custom brushes. So if you haven't installed the brush pack that comes with this action, do that now and be sure to set your brush opacity to 100%. And you can do this quickly by pressing B to activate the brush tool and then 0 to set the opacity to 100%. So I'm going to use this image here, and let's begin. So open up your Actions panel and toggle open the Urban Art 2 action set. You'll see there are 2 steps to the action. Click on Step 1, select Focus, and click Play at the bottom of the Actions panel. Like many of our actions, the first step is to make a selection of our main subject. The pop-up dialog now tells us to paint over the main subject. So let's click Stop to do this now. Now there are a couple ways to do this. You can use the brush, which is automatically selected for you by default, and simply paint over the main subject. You'll notice that you're painting on the main focus area layer, which allows you to use the eraser tool to erase your brushing if you make any mistakes. Now alternatively, I like to select my subject using the Quick Selection tool. So you can click on W or Shift W to toggle to the Quick Selection tool. And to use this method, you need to first click on the background layer where we're going to make a selection of our main subject. Now we make the selection on the background layer because that's currently the only layer with actual pixels on it. So click on the background layer if you're going to use this method. Then just paint over the area that you want to select. And you can increase or decrease the size of this tool using the square bracket keys. Now you can release the mouse button and press it again to continue adding to your selection. Or if you select something outside of the main subject area, you can hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and paint there to subtract those areas from your selection. So let's finish up selecting my main subject here using this method. And actually, I'm going to leave out a part of the subject to show you how to fix that if you miss a spot by mistake. So with our selection made, now we click on the main focus area layer and we're going to fill it with the paint color that we would have been brushing with if we were using the brush tool method instead. So to do this, quickly press Shift Delete and change the drop down to foreground color and then click Enter or OK. Now in this example, you can see I missed a part of my main subject, so that's easy to fix. So just click back on the background layer again, and we'll continue making the selection of those missed areas. And then go back to the main focus area layer and press Shift Delete again and Enter or OK to fill in those remaining areas. Now this particular effect is meant to be a bit messy, so feel free to be more liberal with creating your selection. It doesn't have to be exact, and it doesn't even need to cover your entire subject from top to bottom. It's totally up to you. Okay, so with our main focus area painted, we can now move on to Step 2, Run Urban Art. So click on that and click Play. Now, depending on the speed of your computer, this action may take a couple of minutes to complete. Okay, so there we go. And wow, this one looks good. Okay, so I'm going to close the dialog box here and close the Actions panel out of the way. Okay. So before I get into the customization options, for me, this image is just begging to be cropped. So let's do that first. I can hit C to bring up the crop tool and pick an orientation above here. And yeah, I like that. Okay, very nice. Okay. So let's head on over to the Layers palette and dive in. Now the first group here contains a brand new set of color filters that we've created to give your image a completely different look and feel. So open the toggle for this layer group and you have 6 new color options. So to apply these, turn on the layer visibility for each of these layers to see how they affect your artwork. And you can even go into each of these subgroups and make more fine adjustments if you like. Now, True Blue looks pretty cool on this image. And I can even reduce that just a little by decreasing the opacity of this group. Okay, but for now, I'll turn off the color filter so I can better demonstrate the rest of the custom options that we have available here. Okay, so now we can close up the color filters group and look at our neon glow group. Something our original urban art action was lacking was an energetic component on the final result. So we've created these sort of neon light waves to give that high energy feeling to the image. And all of these are adjustable. So firstly, you can turn on or off this group by clicking the visibility layer icon for the group, or you can toggle it open and make even more adjustments here. So each of these 4 layers can be turned on or off, and you can make opacity adjustments to any of them. And if you aren't fond of the default colors that we've created, you can double click on any of the color swatches and make changes. So let's change number 3 here from blue to orange. So you can actually do this by just double clicking on the actual layer itself, which will bring up the layer style dialog box. In the preview, you can see what the glow currently looks like. So now click on outer glow and click the color swatch to choose a new color. Now you can see in the preview window, it still has a bit of a blue hint to it. So we'll click on the inner glow option and change that as well. Now the preview shows the glow color nicely. Okay, so click OK to apply that. And this can be done for all 4 of these neon lines to create the best color combinations that you feel are right for your image. So next up, we have the main subject layer group. Now before we open that up, you'll notice that there's a layer mask attached to the group here. So if you find that any of the art effects are in the way of your subject's facial features or any other portions of your image where you don't want the effect to cover up, you can just grab a soft white brush, click on the layer mask to make that active, and then paint with white on any of the areas that you would like to restore. So alternatively, if there are areas where you want to bring the effect in to cover more of the subject, you can switch the brush color to black and paint in black over those areas, like this. Okay, so let's open this group and explore the layers inside. So the first 2 layers in here are going to dramatically affect the artwork from image to image. So if you find your image is looking too flat or too contrasty, here's where you can make those adjustments. So you can adjust the visibility of the brightness and fade subject layers to on or off, or double click them to make further refinements. So here, I'll turn the brightness on and double click it to add some more contrast. The fade subject layer works similarly, where you can turn it on or off, or double click it to make those finer adjustments. And once you're happy with the results, you can move to the subject adjust mask layer, where you can double click on the unsharp mask filter to increase or decrease your subject sharpness. Okay, so that's good. We can just close up this group, and our next group contains our pencil scribbles. So there are 3 levels of pencil lines where each one has a separate color adjustment layer. To change the strength of the layer, you click on the scribble layer, not the color layer, and adjust the opacity to your liking. Then to adjust the line color, you can click on the color adjustment layer just above the scribble layer that you're working on. Now I'm really digging this whole purplish blue vibe, so I'm going to change some of the white lines on Scribbles 3 to purple instead of white. So if I zoom into 100%, you can see the effect of that layer here. And again, I can set the opacities as something that works well with the image. Okay, so I'll go back out to 33%. Okay, so you can see the full image here. Okay, so you can play around with the lines and really have some fun in here with these. So let's close up this group, and next up is our paint effects group, and there's 6 levels of paint effects here to create with. Now all of these pull their color from the underlying main image. However, the color for each of these layers can also be adjusted to your liking. So for example, Paint Effect 6. By double-clicking on the adjustment icon on Color 6, just above, I can control the colors of the splashes on this layer. And I can make them darker or lighter with the lightness slider, like this. I can change the amount of saturation, like this. And I can even shift the hues of the underlying color, which can really produce some cool results. Now I can even turn on the colorize checkbox and choose a specific color for just these splashes. So let's say again, I'm overly loving this blue-purple type of vibe here and I want to do that. So I can click on the colorize, crank up the saturation nice and high, and slide the hue slider until I get that perfect tone. And then even adjust the brightness or the darkness as well. So that is too cool. Let's just leave it there. And now if it's too strong, you can reduce the opacity of the paint effects layer, not the color layer. So let's bring it down to like 40% or so here. Good. Now most of these layers work similarly. So paint effects 6, 5, and 3 actually control these sorts of stringy paint splashes. Paint layer 4 is a bit different in that it introduces more of a textured splash to the image. But again, you can control the colors exactly as we did above. Paint effects 2 controls the wider paint splotches just around the edge of our image. And the visibility and opacity can be adjusted here as well. Or you can double click on the adjustment icon of color 2 layer just above it to make those same color adjustments to this layer as well. And Paint Effects 1 does the exact same thing, except this controls the wider paint splashes around the outside of the subject. And now you can get some really interesting results by double clicking that adjustment layer icon on the color 1 layer and reducing saturation right down to 0. And then playing with the lightness setting. Like that. Okay, now lastly, we have the paper background color layer right below. So you'll have the flexibility to change the paper color as well. So double click on the color swatch here, and you can change the paper color. Or you can even bring it right down to black. So let's actually do that. And click OK. And then let's go back to the color 1 layer for the paint effects 1 layer. And let's turn on colorize and pick a deep sort of orange hue with a pretty strong saturation. And let's adjust the lightness a bit to about 25% here. So that gives us a completely different look in just a few quick steps there. And there you have it. This is our brand new, fully controllable Urban Art 2 effect. I hope you have a lot of fun with this one, creating all sorts of artwork using this action. While it was originally designed to work on portraitures, this particular action is going to be spectacular on nature photographs of animals as well. Thanks again for checking out the action, and happy photoshopping. Welcome to the PhotographyBB Action Hero Action for Photoshop. As part of our Artistry2 Portrait Art Actions collection, we just had to include a dynamic action hero style effect, which is going to provide you with hours of fun and outstanding results on everything from photographs of sports, Halloween costumes, social media profiles, cinematic portraits, your children, and so many more. This action was actually inspired by one of the movie posters for the movie Tropic Thunder, where the main characters can be seen posed in front of a giant fireball-style explosion with particles flying out everywhere in just a really cool action hero type of effect. So that's where the inspiration for this action set came from. So let's just dive in and have some fun. So open up the Actions panel and toggle open the PhotographyBB Action Hero set. Now there are 3 actions in this set. The first is step 1, select focus, where you'll brush over the main subject in your photograph to select them. Then you have 2 options for running step 2, which include a small blast explosion or a huge explosion version for those epic portrait poses that require a maximum level of heroism. So I'm going to use this image here of this fine gentleman who certainly looks like he could be an action hero. So let's click on the Step 1 Select Focus action and click Play at the bottom of the Actions panel. The dialog pops up and tells us to paint over the main subject on the main focus area layer, and then to run Step 2 once we've done that. So I'll click Stop to close this dialog. Now there are a few ways to do this. You can use the brush, which is automatically selected for you by default, and simply paint over the subject, making sure to be as accurate as possible. You can change the size of the brush quickly by using the square bracket keys on the keyboard to increase or decrease the brush size. And you'll notice that we're painting on the main focus area layer, which allows you to use the eraser tool to erase your brushing if you make any mistakes. So I actually prefer to select my subject using the quick selection tool. So let me undo this so I can start over and demonstrate how that works. So we can select the quick selection tool by pressing W on the keyboard, or Shift W if it chooses the magic wand, or you can go over to the toolbar and select the quick selection tool. And then to use this method, you first need to click on the background layer, where we're going to make the selection of our main subject. Now we make the selection on the background layer because that's currently the only layer with actual pixels on it. So click the background layer if you're using this method. And then just paint over the area that you want to select. And you can also increase or decrease the size of this tool using the square bracket keys as well. You can even release the mouse button and press it again to continue adding to your selection. Or if you select something outside of the main subject area by accident, you can hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and paint to subtract areas from your selection. So let's finish up selecting my main subject here using this method. And actually, I'm going to leave out part of the subject to show you how you can fix that if you miss a spot by mistake. So with the selection made, now we click on the main focus area layer, and we fill it with the paint color that we would have been using if we were using the brush tool instead. So to do this quickly, press Shift Delete and change the drop down to foreground color and click OK. Now in this example, you can see that I missed part of my subject, so that's easy to fix. Just click back on the background layer again and continue making your selection of the missed areas, and then go back to the main focus area layer and press Shift Delete again and OK to fill in the remaining area. Now next, it's time to run the effect by choosing one of the options for step 2. Now I think this gentleman would benefit from the huge blast effect, so I'll click on that version of step 2 and then click play. Now depending on the speed and configuration of your computer, the action may take a few minutes to complete. Okay, so the effect is complete, and you can close this dialog box here. And then we have several options to explore for further customization. So let's actually close the Actions panel out of the way as well, like this. Okay. And moving over to the Layers palette, there are a number of layer groups here that allow you to further customize the effect to your liking. So the first group here contains 6 of our brand new color filters. And to apply any of these to your image, toggle open the layer group and turn on the visibility of any of the subgroups here like this, and you can change the color effects on your image. Okay, so for this one I actually like the default best here, so I'm going to keep the color filters off in this case. And let's just toggle that group closed, and we can move on to the next layer group, which contains all of these blast particles that we see here in the image. So when we toggle this group open, you can see there are a lot of particle layers. So the first 2 contain the very fine dust particles in the image. There's light dust and there's dark dust. I'll zoom in to 100% view here. And as I toggle the visibility of the light dust layer on and off, you can see the particles in the image here that we're affecting. So these kind of dust streaks in white here. And the dark dust layer acts in a similar way, where you can see the effect of turning that layer's visibility on and off here, just around the main subject. So these dust layers can be left either on or have their visibilities turned off, or you can even reduce their strength by lowering the opacity of either of these layers. So I like the way they look here, so I'm going to leave them turned on. And I'm going to zoom back out again to 33% here so we can get a good full view. And now the next 10 layers are actually 5 levels of Blast Rocks effect, each with their own color fill layer to allow you to control the color of each of these layers. So if we look at just one, the top group here, Blast Rocks 5, this is the layer that contains the actual rock shapes, and then the layer just above it, Tone Rocks 5, is the color fill layer where we can adjust the color of those rocks. So first, you can see the content of the Blast Rocks 5 layer as I toggle the visibility on and off. And now let's have a look at changing the color first before we get into the other options that we have for each of these layers. So to change the color of these rocks, all we need to do is double click on the color swatch on the Tone Rocks 5 layer and pick a new color from the color picker. So let's make them a bright green just for the sake of demonstration. So now you can see when I toggle the visibility of the Blast Rocks 5 layer, not the tone layer, we have our green rocks in the scene. Now we have more control over these effects too. If you click on the little layer effects toggle over on the far right side of the Blast Rocks 5 layer, we have some layer styles as well as a smart filter effect. Now for this layer we have a bevel emboss layer style applied to give more of a three-dimensional shape to the rocks on this layer. So let's zoom in again to 100% to have a look. So as you can see, with this bevel style turned on, the rocks appear to have a bit of an edge depth to them right here. But if I toggle the visibility of the layer style, not the actual layer, just the style, on and off, that depth effect disappears and the rock appears to be more like a flat shape. So now there's also a bit of blur here, which is making this effect less noticeable. So let's turn off the radial blur filter just for a moment by clicking on the visibility eyeball icon for the smart filter on this layer in the layers palette here. And now if I go back and I toggle the bevel layer style back on, you can see the depth effect more clearly now. You can see that there. So we have these controls for each of the Blast Rocks layers. Each one has its own bevel effect coupled with a radial blur smart filter. And because it's a smart filter, you can double click on the radial blur filter right in the layers palette here to make changes to the amount of blur. Now this does take some time to process, so we won't do it now, but just know that the option is available to you. And of course, we also have control over the color of these rocks using the layer above each rock layer, in this case the Tone Rocks 5 as we looked at. So all 5 Blast Rocks layers have these controls available. Now we've set the defaults to look great with most images, but just know that you have all the flexibility in the world to experiment with results that'll best suit your image. So have a lot of fun with these here. Okay, and we can close up this group now. And next we have the Explosion Power group, and this group can be toggled open to make the adjustments to these light streaks that we see radiating out from the main blast. So you can see we have 3 blast highlights layers, and you can control their individual opacities and or their visibilities, and you can double click on any of the color swatches to make changes to the color of the individual light streaks. So for example, if I double click on the reddish swatch here, I can change that to something dramatically different, like blue. And you can see the effect that it has on the light streaks. Okay, I'll click cancel. Okay. So next we have a couple of explosion power layers that are turned off by default. And these can be turned on by toggling their visibility on to give the explosion a little bit more prominence if you would like. So again, have fun playing around with these layers for different effects as well. And we can close up this layer group. And we'll move on to the subject rim lighting group, where we can open up this group here and we can start making custom adjustments if necessary. And the first layer here controls the color tone of the bright rim lighting highlights. And you can double click the color swatch to make changes to this tone if you would like. But because it's an explosion, yellow is a pretty good color to start with. So the remaining rim lighting layers simply control the strength of the rim lighting areas. And you can play around with these if you feel that any parts of the rim lighting are too intense. And you can reduce their opacity or their layer visibilities as well. Also, if you like, you can turn on and off the visibility of the Add more glow layer to give your subject even more of a background glow effect. So if you close up this layer group and you find that you'd still like to make changes to the strength of this particular effect, you can even reduce the opacity of the entire layer group. But for this one, it looks pretty good, so we'll leave it at 100%. Now the next group controls the look of our main subject here. So let's toggle this open and we'll see we have some options. So the first is the color restore layer, which will help to bring back some of the original color tones of the main subject before this blast effect. Now naturally, we've toned the subject by default to match the tones of the explosion blast. But if you would like to bring back any of the original tones, you can simply increase the opacity of this layer, like that, or you can decrease it further if that suits your image better. So this next layer controls the amount of this sort of illustrated or HDR effect. And you can turn the visibility on or off, or reduce the opacity to change the strength of this effect. Now you can also double click on the Gaussian Blur Smart Filter and make adjustments to the effect this way. So double clicking brings up the dialog box. And as you increase the radius, you're effectively adding more contrast to this effect. And as you decrease the radius, you flatten the effect. So you can click OK when you have something that you like for your subject. Now the next layer adds this sort of grungy, gritty effect. And again, you can control it similarly to the illustrated effect layer by adjusting the visibility, opacity level, or by double-clicking the high-pass smart filter to make adjustments there as well. So we'll leave the default settings as it is, since it gives our subject a look that really suits this image nicely. And lastly, if you would like to adjust the color tone that's been applied to the subject, you can actually click on the color swatch of this bottom layer, Adjust Subject Color, and change it to something else. And you'll see now that this only affects the color tones of the subject, not the entire image. So for now, we'll click it open and just show you an example here and see how that affects just the main subject. But we're going to leave it a default as it is, so I'll click cancel and close up the group here. And now our final group contains the layers for the fireball background. So toggling this open, we have a few layers to play around with if you like. And the first controls the toning, and like the other color tone layers in this action, you can simply double click the color swatch to make any color adjustments to the background. Like that, and we'll just click cancel on that. Now the hot smoke layer contains the white smoke effect, and as you increase the opacity here, you'll see the effect of this white smoke, or you can decrease it for less of a smoky effect. And the fire screen layer controls the amount of the yellowish fire parts of the explosion. And you can again adjust the opacity to make any changes to suit your needs. Now the fireball and the black background layers, they can be adjusted, but since this effect is all about the actual fireball, we think the default setting is pretty sweet. So we'll just leave that alone. And that actually completes the effect of our brand new Action Hero action. So I hope you have a lot of fun, especially on photographs of your kids in costumes or playing sports. This is going to look great. So thank you again for checking out our Artistry2 Action Hero action. Enjoy. Okay, let's have a look at our PhotographyBB Fragmented action. Now this effect was born out of a personal need for having a sort of shattered glass type of effect that I was looking to create using photographs of my daughter playing hockey. Now, before you run our fragmented action, it does make use of some of our new custom PhotographyBB brushes. So if you haven't installed the included brush pack that comes with this action, do that now and be sure to set your brush opacity to 100%. You can do this quickly by pressing B to activate the brush tool, and then 0 to set the opacity to 100%. So now I'm going to use this image here actually, and let's begin. So open up your Actions panel and toggle open the Fragmented action set. And you'll see here that there are 3 steps to the action. So click on step 1, select main subject, and click play at the bottom of the actions panel. And like many of our actions, our first step here is to make a selection of our main subject. So the pop-up dialog tells us to now paint over the main subject. So let's now click stop to do this. And we can close the actions panel out of the way too. Now there are a couple ways to do this. So you can use the brush, which is automatically selected for you by default, and simply paint over the main subject, making sure to be as accurate as possible. Now you'll notice that you're painting on the main focus area layer, which allows you to use the eraser tool to erase your brushing if you make any mistakes. Now alternatively, I like to select my subject using the quick selection tool. So to use this method, you first need to click on the background layer where we're going to make a selection of our main subject. And we do the selection on the background layer because that's currently the only layer with actual pixels on it. So you can press W or Shift W to get the quick selection tool, or grab it from the toolbar, and then click on the background layer to make sure that that's active. And then all you do is paint over the areas that you want to select. And you can also increase or decrease the size of this tool using the square bracket keys. Now you can even release the mouse button and press it again to continue adding to your selection. Or if you select something outside of the main subject area by accident, you can hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and paint to subtract areas from your selection. So let's finish up selecting my main subject here using this method. And I'm going to leave out a part of the subject to show you how you can fix that if you miss a spot by mistake. So with our selection made, now we click on the main focus area layer, and we're going to fill it with the paint color that we would have been brushing with if we were using the brush tool method instead. So to do this quickly, press Shift Delete and change the drop down to foreground color and click OK. Now in this example, you can see that I missed a part of my subject in the selection there. So that's easy to fix. So just click back on the background layer again and continue making your selection of the missed areas. Do that here. And then go back to the main focus area layer. Press Shift Delete again and OK to fill in those remaining areas. Now for this effect, you do want to try and make as accurate a selection as possible for the best results. So okay, with our main focus area painted, we can now open up the Actions panel again, and then click on Step 2, Set Fragment Zones, and click Play. Now, the dialog box here tells us to paint just inside of our main subject where we want the shattered effect to be applied. So let's click Stop. And this time, we'll use the default brush that comes up and very roughly just paint where you want to have some shattered glass effect. And you'll see we're painting on a new Fragment Zones layer. Okay, so that's good. And lastly, now we click on Step 3, Run Fragmented, and click Play. Now, depending on the speed of your computer, this action may take a few minutes to complete. Okay, and we have our effect completed here. So now we can make some custom refinements to this final image. So let's click on Stop here and close the Actions panel out of the way. And cool, that looks really good. Okay, so now we have some options that we can use here in the Layers palette. So we'll jump on over here. And the first layer at the top here is the Tonal Adjustments layer group. And we can toggle this open. And we have 3 different tonal adjustment layers to affect this image. Now the first one is the custom contrast layer, and I'll just toggle the visibility on and off. We can see that we've added a sort of subtle contrast look here to the image, which just gives that image a finished look with this type of effect. And if you would like, you can reduce the opacity down to minimize that slightly, leave it cranked up to 100. Or if you're very adventurous, you can double click on the layer adjustment icon here and make changes to the actual contrast curve itself. And close that up. Now the next 2 here, we have set them to 0 by default. So the first is a brightness and contrast layer. So toggling the visibility doesn't do anything at this point. But if I double click on the layer adjustment icon, You can see we have the brightness and contrast controls here, so I can increase the brightness, decrease the brightness. Depending on your image, this will have a different effect as well. Or contrast, same thing. We can increase contrast or decrease contrast as well. So we'll just leave that as close to neutral there and close that up. And same thing with the hue saturation. Again, we have no effect applied right now, but we can double click on that to bring up the controls here. Now first I'll just show you lightness, because that's just going to sort of fade out the image or darken the image as well. We'll leave that close to 0. Saturation is a fun one to play with on this effect. You can increase the saturation, or you can actually decrease it, and it looks really good in black and white. Okay, we'll bring that to neutral. And another fun one to play with is the hue slider here, because this will shift all of the tones of the image. And with this effect, it actually looks pretty cool, depending on the image that you're working with as well. So you can see we can change the entire image tone just by shifting that hue slider. So again, we'll just leave that close to neutral and close that up. And that is the tonal adjustment group right there. So we can toggle that closed. And next we have our color options. So if we toggle this group open, there are a lot of default color options that you can choose from here. So the first is a color mood, and this will just apply a color cast over the image. So if we toggle the visibility on, you can see we have this greenish color cast now, and you can change that by double clicking the color swatch and choosing a different color tone altogether. And choose something warm if you like down there. So lots of control here. We can increase the intensity, click OK if we like that, or we can toggle that off. And there are also a number of preset options here. So there's a black and white one. We can toggle that on. Again, this one looks pretty cool in black and white. Or we can choose any of the default ones here just by toggling their layer visibilities on and off. And if you find one that you like, but it's a bit too strong, like this one, you can just click on the layer to make it active and reduce the opacity down like that. And then you have that effect, but it's not quite as strong. So a lot of options in here to play with. Try them all out and see what works best with your image. So we'll toggle that off for now. We'll just keep it as is, and we'll close up that group. Okay, so next we have our fragments layer group, and you'll notice here that we have a layer mask applied to the fragments group, and it's actually left unmasked right now. So the reason we put this here is if there's just a little bit too many fragments in the image and you want to reduce those fragments, you can click on the layer mask to make it active, and then click B to bring up the brush tool, or select it from the side here, and choose a nice soft brush right there. And then make sure the default color swatch is set to black. And then if you paint with black, painting on the layer mask, so make sure that's active by clicking on it, you can see by painting with black, you're removing some of the shatter, like that. So, but I actually like the look of all those particles, so I'm going to click Command Z to undo that. And we'll leave that as is, but know that that option is available if you want to remove some of the fragments. Now let's toggle this group open. And we have two actual groups inside of that group. So the first is our blurred fragments. And if I toggle the visibility of this on and off, you can see that's affecting some of the blurred fragments, which gives it more of a depth. I'm going to zoom in here to 100%, just so you can see how those appear. So the blurred fragments give this sense of depth that they're coming towards the viewer. And you can toggle this group open as well, and you'll see you have 3 different levels of these sort of glass shards that are blurred, and you can turn individual groups on and off if you want to, or you can reduce their opacities individually, or you can do it as a group as well. So we'll toggle that closed. And then similarly, we have the main fragments group, which are all of the sharper fragments. So toggling that on and off, you can see those are all of the sharp fragments that we've got there. And if you open that group up, you have 3 different levels of these glass shards as well. So we can close those and close up the fragments group. Now next is our main subject group here. And if we toggle that open, we have a couple of options. The first is an option to tone just the main subject. So this, previously when we were looking at these color options before, that tones the entire image. But this one here, this layer, tone main subject, will just actually apply a tone to the subject and not to the whole image, so not to the background. So if we turn the visibility on, you'll see now that the image is toned, the subject is toned blue, but we can double click that and change that if we want. Maybe we want him to be more of a warm tone, like that. And as you can see, it affects just the main subject when I toggle that on and off. So you can get creative and see for different effects what you would like to do here. So we'll toggle that off for now. And then we have the main subject cutout layer, which we actually don't need to do anything to. But underneath that, we have the original main subject. So if we don't like how the shattered effect has removed parts of the main subject, which it should because the subject is shattering, we can restore that by clicking on the main subject layer, visibility icon on, and that brings back the whole entire main subject, but it keeps these glass shards. So it doesn't look as realistic, but if you prefer this effect to have the main subject there, you can return the main subject by clicking the visibility on, or you can bring the opacity down a little bit so you can have sort of a partial effect, and that's entirely up to you. But I like the way it looks without this layer on, so we will turn that off. It's pretty cool. And we can toggle that group closed. Okay, and lastly, we have our background layer group. Now what we've got in here is the first layer is a blurred background called the background blurred layer. And what that does is if we toggle that on, I'm going to zoom back out actually so you can see this whole entire image. So this applies a blur to the background. So you can get creative with different effects here. If you're using this for a poster or a flyer of some sort, or if you just want to create a different background look, having a blurred background option can be quite handy. And you can even double click on the Camera Raw Smart Filter for this layer. And that will bring up some additional options of what you can do with just the background layer here. So if you want, you can really crank up the exposure. You can bring it down, make it darker. That looks pretty cool. We can maybe adjust the shadows and highlights if we want to. Add some more contrast, but you can play around with these layers here. For different backgrounds, it's going to have different effects, obviously. And the vibrance is another fun one to play with because you can change the vibrance of just the background layer. So let's actually try that. Click OK and see how that looks. There we go. So that is a pretty cool effect. And that, again, is just on the blurred background layer. So we can turn that off if we don't like it, bring back the original background, or turn it back on, or we can reduce the effect by bringing down the opacity, just as we like to do. Okay, so that looks pretty cool. And next we have, so if we want to use the original background, we're going to toggle this one off so it's not covering it up. And we have the same Camera Raw filter available for the original background. So we're double click on that. And again, now we can make changes to the original background. Let's say we want to go crank up the exposure. Click OK. And now that's what we've got, just pure white cranked up exposure background there. And you can toggle this effect on and off by changing the smart filter visibility right there. And that completes our fragmented action effect. So thanks again for checking out this action. I think you're going to have a lot of fun creating very interesting images with this particular effect. It works really well on photographs of sports, athletes, or any subject that's in motion, especially like fast-moving cars, things like that. You're going to have a lot of fun creating different effects with this action. So thank you again, and enjoy. Welcome to Portrait Magic 2 Actions for Photoshop. This action set was designed to perform skin smoothing while still retaining natural skin features, such as the texture of the skin, freckles, moles, and other natural features that you may not want to smooth away. Now, we've carefully crafted this action to work with different types of poses and skin types to perform the most natural skin smoothing effect possible in a single click. So we start by opening up the Actions panel and going to Portrait Magic 2, the action set here, and toggling that open. And you'll see here we have a number of different options inside this action set. So this first section here is all about the skin smoothing, and we've created a few different options depending on the type of shot that you're working with. So we have skin smoothing for a full body model shot, a half body model shot, headshots for males, and headshots for females. And we've separated these two because naturally, men and women do have different facial features, such as facial hair, that we need to deal with differently when skin smoothing. We have a second section here, which allows us to add contrast to the image and also some tone controls for the image. The third section here can add some dramatic type of skin glow effects, and these are popular with some wedding photographers and also in the fashion industry as well. And then this last section here has some special effects that we'll dive into towards the end here. So let's have a look here. We're going to work with this image of a model, and it is pretty close to a half body shot, but we're actually going to use the headshot smoothing action for this particular case here. Now I've selected this model in particular because I will zoom in here and show you she has some facial features that we may wish to keep intact. So you can see her skin tone is actually pretty naturally beautiful, and we do have some freckles here, which are gorgeous, and we're probably going to want to keep those instead of smoothing them away. So what we do is we select the headshot female action and click play, and the action will run in one click. And depending on the speed of your computer, this may take a few minutes to complete. So that is finished. Now we're going to zoom back in here to 50% just to get a better look at what's going on. And we can close the actions panel out of the way for now. And now we have some different layers here in the layers palette that we can play with. We have a skin detail layer, which is actually the sharpness of the skin texture. We have a smoothness layer, which controls the amount of smoothness of the skin. And the background layer is the original image. So first, I'm just going to toggle on and off the other layers so you can see the effect that this has on the overall image. So by holding down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and clicking on the visibility icon of the background layer, we can see the effect of the skin smoothing. And what this action is designed to do is to remove any patchy tones in the skin while still keeping texture in the skin. So we're going to turn on all the layers, and we'll start with the skin detail layer. So now by default, the opacity is set to 100%, and if we want to crank up the sharpness of the skin detail, we can do that by increasing the opacity to anything you like. Now, we may want to zoom in here to 100%. Let's do that, just so you can see how this affects the image more clearly. So that's at 100% skin sharpness, texture sharpness, and we can reduce that down to what we like. So we set the default at 50%, which does a good job in most cases. So we'll leave that as 50%. Now, if you would like to, you can even double click on the high pass smart filter here, which will open up the high pass dialog box. And you can make adjustments to how we're sharpening the skin. So the radius will affect the different size of the sharpening that we're applying to the image. So if you're working with a very close-up shot, you might want to have a larger radius than if you're working with a far back shot. So adjusting this radius, you'll see it has an effect on how we're sharpening the skin. And too high is not going to look very good at all, as you can see here. And too low won't have much of an effect. So you want to find something in the sweet spot of about between 1 to 2 pixels, depending on your image here. So we'll keep it at 1.5 for this image and click OK. And again, we can reduce the effect or increase the effect by changing the opacity of this layer. So next we have the actual smoothness layer of the skin. And again, we set the default opacity down from 100, so it's at 70%. And you can increase this if you like, or decrease it to bring back some of those natural skin features. So if we decrease it down to like 35% here, we can see that we still have the freckles, which are great because we may not want to smooth those away. Now, if you're working in a situation where you do need to smooth them away, whether it's for commercial work or if the model has requested that, you can crank that up to 100%. And it reduces the amount of the freckles considerably. And we can even change that more by double clicking on the surface blur smart filter here. And the dialog box will pop up And now we can make some changes to how we're blurring the skin itself. Now this isn't actually blurring away any of the texture of the skin. This is just blurring away the colors of the skin. So the patchy colors or any blemish colors as well. So by increasing the radius, you're adding more blur. And by decreasing the radius, you're removing blur. So you can play around with these settings. This is the default setting we've selected to work with headshots. And again, you can make adjustments as necessary. So we'll click cancel to close that. And there we have it. So you can again adjust the sharpness by changing the detail layer here, the opacity or the high pass smart filter, and again adjusting the smoothness layer visibility through the opacity or the surface blur amount by double clicking on that smart filter. Now I did mention that we have some other options available in this action set. By adding contrast or tone control or some dramatic glow. So let's take a look at those. Now we're going to zoom back out here to 25% so we can see the full image. And what we'll do is we'll click on the add contrast, click play, and that just gives us a contrast effect here. And we can turn that on and off by adjusting the visibility toggle. We can change the opacity if we just want to reduce it a little bit. And if you want to make custom changes to the amount of contrast, you can just double click on the little adjustment layer icon here. And then you can make changes to this curve if you would like. So we can bring up the darks a little bit there, bring up the highlights even, and change it however you like. And we'll close that there. And similarly, we can open up the actions panel again, click on tone control, and we'll play on that action. And this gives us a color tone option that we have here. And this is similar to like a camera color filter that you might put over the lens. So double click on the color swatch here to change that tone control. If you want a subtle amount of warmth there, or maybe you would even like to cool the image by changing it to a blue color there. So you can experiment to see what works best with your particular image if you want to add a different tone overlay to that image. So we'll click OK. That looks pretty good actually. Now we can open up the actions panel again here, and we'll see we have different amounts of dramatic glow. Now this is a popular effect in the fashion industry especially, and also for some wedding photographers like to have this dreamy sort of skin glow applied to the model that you're working with. So we have different amounts of glow, and these are just light, medium, and heavy. You would only select whichever one you want to use. So let's just go with a light glow on this model. Click that action and click play. And we'll just close up this dialog box. It's just telling us that we can reduce the opacity to suit our image. Okay, so we wind up with this glow light layer right here, and it's set to 55% opacity. And again, if we increase the opacity, we increase the amount of glow, as you can see. If we decrease the opacity, we remove that from the skin. So you have these different glow levels depending on how you want to affect the overall look of the image. I actually like that at 100%, so I'm going to leave that right there. That's kind of a cool look. Okay, and in this last section here, we do have some special effects if those are desired for your image. So we have this small sparkles that we can add to the image. So we'll click that action and click play. And now we come up with this dialog box here. We don't see any sparkles yet. That's telling us because we need to brush them in by brushing over the layer mask. So let's click stop. And if the layer mask isn't already selected, which we have done by default, you can just click on that to make it active. You don't want to click on the thumbnail of the layer itself like this here. You want to make sure the mask is selected with these little corners that are highlighted around the mask. And what you can do is select a brush and make sure it is a white brush down here. And we're using a soft brush at 250. We can increase the brush size by clicking on the square bracket keys or decrease the brush size depending what we want. And when we paint with white on this layer mask, it's going to reveal some sparkle effect. Let's have a look. So there we go. We can add these little sort of glitter effect here. Move the actions panel out of the way. And if I zoom in to 100%, you'll see what we're really adding. Let's go up here. We have these little tiny sort of sparkly glitter effect that we can add to the image. And let's just zoom back out to 25% again. And let's look at the next special effect we have, which are big sparkles. So similar to the small sparkles, we'll do that one. Click play to run it. Okay, and we have the same dialog box appearing here, so we'll close that. And once again, making sure our layer mask is highlighted, we'll click that. And we can start painting. We'll increase the brush size here and move the actions panel out of the way. And we'll start painting some sort of bigger sparkles here that we can add a different sort of effect to the image here. And once again, if I zoom in to 100%, you can see what we're adding here, these sort of little starburst sparkle effects here. So we'll zoom back out to 25% one more time and look at the final option we have in the special effects, which are the bokeh effects group. So let's click on this action here, add bokeh effects. Click on play to run that. Okay, and the dialog box appears here. It says toggle open the bokeh effects group to adjust the opacity and visibility of the small, medium, and large bokeh layers. So we do have 3 levels of bokeh that we can play with here. So you can also paint with a black brush on the layer mask of the entire bokeh effects group, or the layer mask of each individual layer to hide the bokeh from covering important areas of your image, such as the face, of course. So let's click stop to do that. And why don't we do that? We'll close the action panel out of the way. We have a layer mask of the bokeh effects group, so we won't open that just yet. We'll keep that closed. Make sure the layer mask is selected. And this time, because we're hiding instead of revealing, we're going to paint with a black brush to hide the effect. So we'll click on the exchange swatches here. Make sure we're using a black foreground color on the brush. And as I paint over her face on the layer mask, you'll see that hides the bokeh effect over the face, which is much better. Okay. Now we can toggle this group open as mentioned, so we'll do that. And we have 3 different levels. We have bokeh large, bokeh medium, and bokeh small. And if I toggle on and off the visibility, you can see where the large bokeh is there, the medium, and the small. And again, all of these are adjustable. We can paint on the masks of these to hide them in certain areas, or we can click on, for example, bokeh small. I feel that's a little bit too strong, so we can click on the bokeh small layer to make it active and reduce the opacity. I still like it, but maybe I like it better at 10%. And there we go. We have some special effects. We have the skin smoothing. We have the dramatic glow. And we've changed the look of our image dramatically. So what I can do is go back to that background layer, holding down the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac, toggling the visibility, and we'll see the before-after transformation of this image. And that is Portrait Magic 2. So I hope you have a lot of fun with this action. Again, you can create some wonderful effects on portraits, so have a good time with this one. Thanks again, and enjoy. On behalf of myself and everyone here at PhotographyBB, thank you for checking out our brand new Artistry2 actions for Photoshop. We hope you have hours of fun creating stunning works of art with these, and I personally look forward to seeing everything you create using these actions.